Technically, we've already covered the basics of iterating over data in our for loop video, but chances are you might have found it a little confusing because we hadn't really covered data structures yet. Kind of hard to split them up. But let's cover again the basics really fast, and then I'm going to show you a few more nuances of it to help you manage things a little bit more clearly as you begin to really work with data structures in more detail. So the first thing I've done here is I've just created a list with a variety of different data in it. Remember that we have a heterogeneous set of data allowed, so I can mix and match strings and ints and bools and floats wherever I want. So what am I going to do here? Well, let's just print out our data straight up, and it's going to list it all together as one object. But what if I wanted to actually go through and list these things one at a time, access them individually? Well, I need to iterate, or kind of go through one at a time, this entire list of things. And I do so like this. I say for, and then I give a name to the local variable. I could call this element, or I could call this item, or I could call this thing, or I could call this x, whatever name I want to give. I'm just going to call it item in my data. And then item, as this loops, the first time it loops, we'll have apple assigned to it. Then the second time, we'll have 1 assigned to it, and then orange assigned to it, and so on all the way to the end. So what I'm going to do for each of these items, I'm just going to print them one at a time. You see me printing them all out on their own line in the order that they're in the data. So I've iterated through each piece of data and then operated on each entry one at a time. Awesome. So this is basic iteration. Nice and easy way of accessing all the elements of a data structure. Now, I want to show you where we kind of get into trouble sometimes, where instead of printing here, what if I want to actually change some information? I'm actually going to come back to this mixed and matched one in a sec. For now, I'm going to create a num data list. Oops. And let's, no, I want a list here. Let's just put in the numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Because it's going to be a bit easier to work with numbers of a homogeneous type rather than a bunch of heterogeneous data here. So I'm going to say, instead of item in data, let's just say for num in our num data. Don't get confused. I don't actually have to say num. I can just say z if I want to. It's just a placeholder name. But num kind of keeps it nice and clear what I'm doing. And just to make sure this is working, let's print out our numbers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right down the line. Perfect. But what if instead I wanted to change the values inside of this list? So just to try something, can I say num plus equals 1 to add 1 to each of these values? Well, let's give it a try and see what happens. And in this case, oh, I need to actually print out all the values at the end of it. So let's print out my num data at the end of this operation. The big reveal, nothing's changed. Huh, that's annoying. What's the problem here? Num is a local variable. Its scope is limited only in the one loop that it's generated. So the first time, and it's also just a placeholder for the value. Num does not become this element slot. It's a reference to this element slot. And so that means that num takes on the value that's in this element, but it isn't the element itself. So when I'm printing out num plus 1 in here, I can print out num in here, and I should see it report the added values when it's inside the loop. But once we get back out, it actually didn't permanently update the list itself. So, okay, I can still kind of do the addition inside of the loop, but I wanted this to be persistent. I want the data to actually be changed while looping through. So how can I do this? Well, the best way is to, instead of iterating over the entries directly, we want to iterate over the entries elements. So I need to go over the range of the length of my num data, which means how many entries are in my num data, and I want to go through that many numbers. So this is really nice and generalized. It's not going to ever go out of bounds. It's just going to access exactly the number of elements inside of this. And then what I can do inside of this loop instead is say my num data in the num slot. So the first loop through, this will be 0, then 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, allowing me to access the data in each slot directly rather than indirectly through a reference. And in this case, I can actually say plus equals 1. And let's see what the final result is for printing our num data. Aha, persistent results. things that carried on over, I actually altered the values inside of that data structure by using this slightly different strategy. So we kind of have these two different ways of doing it. I can iterate over the thing in my num data and just print out the things one at a time. Bang. Or I can iterate over the actual range of elements and then access the internals of those elements to actually make permanent changes to them. Both really useful processes. Okay, so we've operated on a nice homogeneous set of data, but there's a problem with this type of data structure here. Because what if I wanted to, for x in my data, no, not the data, in the range of the length of my data, in this case, I want to go through one at a time and go, I want to actually take my data's slot and do something to it. Plus equals 1. And what's going to happen when I go through this? Oh, can only concatenate string, not int to string. So my first entry already has an issue. I can't just add 1 to the string. So what if I did like, oh, a string of 1, or just like the string of 1 here. And then, oh, I can't perform math on the string. So the first one worked, and now this one broke. So the mixed data types means that this isn't really going to work. Like, and then true, like how was 1 going to be added to true? Like that doesn't make any sense. So am I just totally hooped? I just can't actually iterate over mixed data sets? Well, here's a solution I can offer you. I pre-created this so I can save some time in typing. We have the ability to check the type of a piece of data. We can go if is instance, and then we add in two parameters: the actual variable we're checking and the type of data we're checking for. So I'm saying if this variable, which is the variable I'm iterating over, is of int type, then perform this functionality. However, if it's of string type, perform this separate functionality. If it's a Boolean or a float, perform the other ones. So in this case here, I'm actually going to look through and print out the results just to show you some examples. The apple is a string. The num, 1 is a num, or an int, I guess I should have said. String for orange, num for 4, string for zoo. And notice here it says num for true, string for panda, and float for 3.14. So interesting. It actually took in true as a 0 or 1 value, which is what can sometimes be held for these Boolean states. So it actually interpreted it kind of interestingly. So it's not a perfect solution, but this is instance check allows us to at least kind of prune out and basically allow us to not break things in our iteration